There are moments in history when everything changes. When the innocent become warriors, and the meek discover they possess teeth sharper than anyone ever imagined. This is the story of humanity's awakening, told through the eyes of those who stood at the edge of extinction and chose to fight back. The observation deck of Station Meridian offered the most beautiful view in the solar system. Lieutenant Rebecca Torres pressed her hand against the reinforced glass, watching Earth rotate slowly below, her blue oceans catching the sunlight like scattered diamonds. She had been stationed here for 6 months, monitoring deep space communications, and every single day had been routine, peaceful, boring even. Her partner, tech specialist David Park, sat at his console, eating synthetic noodles from a silver pouch. He was young, barely 23, with dark hair that never seemed to stay in regulation style. Rebecca often joked that he loved his computers more than people, and David never argued. The screens in front of him displayed various wavelengths of cosmic radiation, asteroid trajectories, and the standard chatter from mining vessels scattered throughout the belt. Down on Earth, in the gleaming towers of Geneva, Director Helena Voss prepared for another tedious council meeting. She had been head of the United Earth Council for 2 years, spending most of her time mediating disputes between nations over mining rights and space territories. Helena was a woman who believed in diplomacy above all else, who thought every problem had a peaceful solution if you just talked long enough. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her blue eyes held the kind of patience that came from decades of political service. The meeting room filled with representatives from every nation. There was Ambassador Chun Wei from the Pacific Alliance, a shrewd negotiator who never missed a detail. General Robert Blackwood from the Atlantic Federation sat rigid in his chair, his military bearing evident in every movement. Minister Fatima al-Rashid represented the African Union, her sharp mind hidden behind a warm smile. They gathered as they always did, ready to debate and discuss the mundane matters of governing a unified Earth. Everything changed at exactly 1400 hours. David dropped his noodle pouch, sending it floating in the low gravity as his screens erupted with alerts. Rebecca, we have multiple contacts entering the solar system. 3 vessels, massive displacement, unknown origin. Rebecca was at his side in seconds. Her heart hammered as she watched the sensor data populate. The objects were slowing from faster-than-light travel, a technology Earth had only theorized about. Their energy signatures were off the charts, each ship reading larger than anything humanity had ever constructed. "Get me Director Voss," Rebecca said, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "Get me everyone. This is first contact." Within minutes, every screen on Earth and in orbit displayed the same image. 3 ships, elegant and terrible, their hulls reflecting starlight like polished obsidian. They positioned themselves just beyond lunar orbit, silent and waiting. Humanity held its collective breath. In Geneva, Helena Voss stared at the projection hovering above the council table. Her hands trembled slightly, though she forced them still. This was the moment every leader had been trained for, but never truly believed would come. "We respond with peace," she said firmly. "We show them we are civilized, that we welcome contact. Does anyone disagree?" General Blackwood leaned forward. "Director, we should scramble our defense fleet. Not as a threat, but as a precaution. We know nothing about their intentions." Helena nodded. "Approved. But weapons cold unless I give explicit authorization. Ambassador Chun Wei, draft a message of greeting. Use every language we have, every mathematical sequence. Let them know we come in peace." The message was sent. For 2 hours, there was no response. Then, finally, a transmission came through. The voice that spoke was smooth, almost pleasant, and spoke perfect English with no trace of accent. "People of Earth, I am Executor Vane of the Dominion Collective. We have traveled far to bring you an opportunity. Your world has been selected for integration into our union. You will provide resources and labor. In exchange, we will allow your species to continue existing. You have one planetary rotation to accept these terms. Compliance is not optional. The transmission ended, leaving silence in its wake. Rebecca felt ice form in her stomach. David turned to look at her, his young face pale. They just demanded our surrender, he whispered. They traveled across the stars to make us slaves. In Geneva, the council room erupted. General Blackwood stood so fast his chair toppled backward. This is an invasion, he shouted. We need to mobilize everything we have. Director Voss raised her hand for silence, though her own thoughts were racing. How do we fight ships that can cross the galaxy? Our weapons are designed for asteroids and debris, not warfare. The Atlantic Federation has some experimental railguns on our orbital platforms, Blackwood said. The Pacific Alliance has laser arrays for mining. We have pieces, Director. We have never needed to put them together as weapons before. Minister Al-Rashid spoke quietly. Then perhaps it is time we learned. My people did not survive centuries of hardship by accepting chains. If they want Earth, they will have to take it from our corpses. Helena looked at each face around the table. She saw fear, yes, but also something else. Something fierce and unbroken. She thought of her grandchildren playing in the parks of Geneva, of every child on Earth who deserved to grow up free. Very well, she said. Send our response. Tell them Earth declines their generous offer. Tell them we are not interested in their integration. And then prepare for war. The message was transmitted. Rebecca watched from Station Meridian as it traveled toward the alien vessels. She knew what would come next. They all did. Species that crossed the stars to make demands were not the type to accept rejection peacefully. 8 hours later, the Dominion ships moved. One broke formation, its trajectory locked on Station Meridian. Rebecca sounded the evacuation alarm, but she knew there was not enough time. The station held 400 soul scientists and technicians and families, people who had never held a weapon or imagined they would die in battle. David grabbed her arm. The escape pods can only hold 200. Rebecca, what do we do? She looked at him. This young man who loved his computers, who had his whole life ahead of him. You get to a pod, she ordered. That is what you do. What about you? Somebody has to record this. Somebody has to make sure Earth knows exactly what they are dealing with. Now go. David hesitated only a moment before running. Rebecca turned back to her console, her fingers flying across the keys. She activated every camera, every sensor, directing them at the approaching Dominion vessel. If this was the end, humanity would at least have the data. They would know their enemy. The Dominion ship opened fire. A beam of coherent energy, brighter than the sun, struck Station Meridian dead center. Rebecca had exactly enough time to transmit the sensor logs before the walls turned molten and the air ignited. 400 people became atoms scattered across the void. Their deaths were instant, painless, and absolutely meaningless to the creatures who had killed them. On Earth, Helena Voss watched the destruction through tears she could not stop. Beside her, General Blackwood had gone completely still, his jaw clenched so tight she could hear his teeth grinding. Around the world, billions of humans saw the same footage. They watched their brothers and sisters die. They watched aliens casually murder 400 souls as a demonstration of power. And something ancient awakened in the human species, something that had been dormant during centuries of peace. The same instinct that had helped our ancestors survive ice ages and predators, that had driven them to explore and conquer their own world, now fixed on these invaders with absolute clarity. The Dominion Collective had made a fatal miscalculation. They had assumed humans would react like other species, would crumble under the weight of superior technology. They didn't understand that humans had spent their entire evolutionary history as prey animals who learned to bite back. They didn't know that humanity's greatest weapon was not technology or strength, but the stubborn, furious refusal to accept defeat. Director Voss wiped her eyes and stood tall. General Blackwood, you have full authorization to use every weapon we possess. Mobilize everything. Every ship, every platform, every experimental system we have ever developed. Show these invaders what happens when you threaten Earth. The general smiled grimly. With pleasure, Director. Let us teach them why humans stopped having natural predators. Across the planet, militaries scrambled. Ships that had been designed for exploration were hastily retrofitted with weapons. Mining lasers became siege cannons. Construction drones were reprogrammed for combat. It was desperate, improvised, and absolutely insufficient against technology thousands of years more advanced. But it was a start. And humans had always been good at starting fights they had no business winning. Thanks for watching. Nearby, Colonel James Okonkwo from the African Union studied the enemy vessels, his engineer's eye searching for any flaw, any crack in their perfect design. They haven't moved since destroying Meridian, Tanaka observed, her voice tight. Nearby, Colonel James Okonkwo from the African Union studied the enemy vessels, his engineer's eye searching for any flaw, any crack in their perfect design. They haven't moved since destroying Meridian, Tanaka observed, her voice tight. They're just sitting there, waiting for us to surrender. Nearby, Colonel James Okonkwo from the African Union studied the enemy vessels, his engineer's eye searching for any flaw, any crack in their perfect design. They haven't moved since destroying Meridian, Tanaka observed, her voice tight. They're just sitting there, waiting for us to surrender. Arrogant, Okonkwo countered softly. Or maybe cautious. They expected immediate capitulation. Our defiance might have surprised them. Blackwood gestured, and a 3D model of the Dominion ships filled the air. Intelligence Officer Volkov, he prompted. A young Russian woman, Nina Volkov, stepped forward. She looked exhausted, having worked nonstop since the attack, but her eyes were electric. I found something, she announced, her voice cutting through the tension. She was replaying the final data stream from Rebecca Torres, the officer who died transmitting it from Meridian. The lead ship, the one that fired the killing blow. Watch its energy signature right before it discharges its main weapon. She highlighted a section of the replay. See that spike? To power that beam, the entire ship had to divert energy from its engines and defensive screens. For about 4.3 seconds, it was completely vulnerable. 4 seconds isn't much time, Tanaka said quietly. It's enough to die in, Blackwood replied, his gaze fixed on the hologram. It's also enough to fire back. What if we can force them to shoot first? Understanding dawned on Okonkwo's face. You want to use our ships as bait. Draw their fire, then hit them while their shields are down. Tanaka shook her head. Our weapons can't scratch their hulls. Our mining lasers and railguns were built to break rocks, not military-grade armor. Then we don't aim for their armor, Blackwood said, zooming in on the alien ship's engine section. We aim for their exhaust ports, their sensor arrays, anything external. We blind them, cripple them. We make them bleed, even if we can't kill them. The room fell silent. It's a suicide mission, Volkov stated bluntly. Whoever plays bait won't survive. Blackwood met her tired eyes. I know. Within 6 hours, the grim plan was set. 12 ships volunteered for the initial strike. The attack began at dawn over the Pacific. The 12 ships accelerated toward the Dominion fleet, broadcasting surrender signals on every channel. The alien commander, Executor Vane, responded immediately, his voice dripping with condescending satisfaction. Wise choice, humans. Proceed to docking coordinates. You will be processed and assigned duties within the Dominion. Began at dawn over the Pacific. The 12 ships accelerated toward the Dominion fleet, broadcasting surrender signals on every channel. The alien commander, Executor Vane, responded immediately, his voice dripping with condescending satisfaction. Wise choice, humans. Proceed to docking coordinates. You will be processed and assigned duties within the Dominion. Captain Rousseau gave a grim smile and cut the transmission. On the Strike Force's private channel, his voice was steady. All ships, it's been an honor. When they reached the designated coordinates, Rousseau gave the final order. All 12 ships opened fire at once. Mining lasers scored blackened lines across the obsidian halls. Railgun slugs, powerful enough to shatter mountains, impacted with dull thuds. Against the Dominion warships, it was like throwing pebbles, but it got the desired response. All 3 Dominion vessels opened fire. Brilliant, terrible beams of energy reached out and touched the human ships. Prometheus died first, vaporized so completely that not even debris remained. The others followed in a cascade of silent explosions, 12 crews buying 4.3 seconds with their lives. In the hidden chaos of an orbital debris field, Captain Tanaka's tsunami, running cold and camouflaged, sprang to life. Now, Blackwood roared from the war room. The tsunami fired. Its main weapon was an experimental railgun, designed to deflect planet-killing asteroids. It launched a tungsten rod the size of a bus at a staggering fraction of light speed. The projectile screamed through the vacuum of space, striking the lead Dominion ship exactly where Volkov had predicted, right at the vulnerable junction where the main engine met the hull. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the entire rear section of the alien vessel blew outward in a chain reaction of secondary explosions. Atmosphere vented in glittering, crystalline clouds. The great ship lurched, its smooth, perfect flight turning into a wounded, chaotic tumble. On the bridge of the tsunami, Tanaka watched the impossible sight. "First blood," she whispered. Aboard the Dominion flagship, Executor Vane staggered as his bridge shook violently. Damage reports flooded his console. 17 decks breached, main engines offline, crew casualties. He stared at the tactical display in utter disbelief. They sacrificed 12 ships as a diversion, his second officer reported, his voice trembling. The real attack came from a hidden vessel. These humans, they fight with deception. Vane felt a chilling sensation he hadn't experienced in decades of conquest. Uncertainty. Every other species had either surrendered or died fighting conventionally. None had ever managed to seriously damage a Dominion warship. He opened a channel to his high command, knowing the report he was about to give would not be well received. Back on Earth, the war room erupted. Officers cheered, hugged, some weeping openly at the concrete proof that these godlike invaders could be hurt. Blackwood allowed himself a thin, fleeting smile before calling for order. "Don't celebrate yet," he warned, his voice cutting through the noise. "We damaged 1 ship out of 3, and we lost 12 crews to do it. They will adapt. They will be ready for this tactic next time." He was right. 6 hours later, the Dominion response came. The 2 undamaged ships descended into Earth's atmosphere, their massive forms creating sonic booms that shattered windows across entire continents. They didn't fire. They didn't have to. One positioned itself directly over Beijing, the other above New York City. The message was terrifyingly clear. Attack us again, and millions of your own will die. In an emergency session, Director Voss of the Global Council was grim. "We can't strike while they hold our cities hostage. If we attack and they retaliate against civilians, we lose the moral foundation of this war." Minister al-Rashid slammed his hand on the table. "If we do nothing, we've already lost. They'll just make more demands, use more threats. We have to find another way." The answer came from the most unexpected source. Dr. Raymond Pierce, a xenobiologist who had been obsessively studying the alien transmissions, burst into the council chamber. Among them was a young woman named Sophie Chun, a cargo pilot who had lost her brother on Station Meridian. 3 months after the Dominion fleet limped away from Earth, the world had changed. You could see it in the new ships filling the orbital shipyards, their designs born from hard lessons written in blood. But the greatest changes weren't in metal or technology. They were in us, in the hearts of people who had stared into the abyss of extinction and chosen to stand firm. Director Helene Voss stood in the memorial garden where Station Meridian's crew once trained. 400 trees now grew there, one for each soul lost. She came here on the hard days to remember why her choices mattered. Today, she wasn't alone. Sophie Chun sat on a bench, her fingers tracing the name on a plaque. David Park, a loved brother. He could have escaped. His name was on the lists. But he stayed at his console, transmitting the data that gave us a fighting chance. Voss sat beside her. "He would be proud of you," she said softly. "What you did with that cargo drone, getting the payload inside their ship. You saved millions." Sophie just shook her head, tears on her cheeks. "I just wanted them to hurt the way I was hurting." "Does that make me a bad person?" "It makes you human," Voss replied. "We're not saints, Sophie. We love fiercely and we grieve deeply. Your brother gave his life so we could fight back. You honored that sacrifice. There is no shame in that." They sat in silence, two women carrying the weight of survival, surrounded by the rustling leaves, a sound of peace purchased with terrible sacrifice. Across the city, in a rehab center, Captain Yuki Tanaka was fighting a different battle. The tsunami, her ship, had been caught in the shockwave when the Dominion vessel went down. A shattered leg, 3 broken ribs. The doctor said she might never walk without help again. Tanaka had other plans. "One more set," she told her therapist through gritted teeth, forcing her damaged leg to hold her weight. "I command a warship. I do not get to be weak." Her therapist, Marcus, shook his head in admiration. "Captain, you crippled an alien warship with a single shot. Nobody questions your strength." "I question it," Tanaka shot back, taking another agonizing step. "Every day I question if I'm strong enough for what comes next." "Because they'll be back, Marcus. Maybe not them, but someone will. They'll hear Earth fights back, and they'll see it as a challenge. Then you'll beat them too," Marcus said with certainty. "Because that's what we do. We fall, and we get back up. Every single time." Tanaka paused, leaning on the bars, and allowed a small smile. "My grandmother used to say that. She survived the coastal floods of 2047, lost everything, and rebuilt. She taught me resilience isn't about never falling. It's about deciding the ground doesn't get to keep you." Meanwhile, deep beneath Geneva, Dr. Raymond Pierce was haunted by his own creation. The biological weapon he designed had saved Earth, but it had crossed a line. He had created life for the sole purpose of destroying other life. His assistant, Amara, found him staring into a microscope at 3 a.m. She brought him coffee. "Thinking about ethics again," she observed. "Always," Pierce admitted. "I created something terrible, Amara. It saved us. But what if other species see humanity as the ones who weaponize disease? We could become the monsters we fought." Amara, who had lost her parents in the tsunamis caused by the invaders, understood his struggle. "My mother was a philosophy professor," she said quietly. "She told me morality isn't about the absence of difficult choices. It's about making them with full awareness of their weight. You knew the implications. You did it anyway because the alternative was extinction. That doesn't make you a monster. It makes you someone who loves humanity enough to carry that burden." "And if it falls into the wrong hands?" Pierce asked. "Then we fight against that too," Amara replied firmly. "We don't let the fear of future misuse stop us from surviving the present. Evil wins when good people refuse to act because the action isn't perfect." Thousands of miles away, in a small village in the African Union, Colonel James Okonkwo sat with his elderly father under the stars. The old man had seen humanity's worst and best. He listened as his son recounted the battle for Earth. "We were so afraid, Father," Okonkwo admitted. "Their technology was beyond us, but we adapted, we improvised, we sacrificed." His father nodded slowly. "That is the story of our people, James, not just ours, but all humans. We have always faced things larger than us. Lions, drought, empires. We survived not because we were the strongest, but because we refused to surrender. Did we do the right thing?" Okonkwo asked, "Fighting instead of submitting?" "We lost so many." The old man looked to the sky. "Would those people have wanted you to surrender? To have their children raised as slaves? You gave them the chance to die free rather than live in chains. That is not a small thing, my son. That is everything." And just like that, a tension Okonkwo had carried since the battle released its grip. The grief remained, but now it had meaning. Back in the memorial garden, General Blackwood walked with Minister Al-Rashid. They stopped where 12 clusters of trees honored the volunteer crews who sacrificed their ships. "They bought us time," Blackwood said. 4.3 seconds. That's all it took to change everything. Al-Rashid touched the bark of the tree. The captain of the Prometheus was a miner, not a soldier. They were scientists and engineers who became heroes because the moment demanded it. "That's our strength," Blackwood replied. "When everything is on the line, ordinary people do extraordinary things. The greatest military in the galaxy can't prepare for that." "What comes next?" Al-Rashid asked. "The war is far from over." Blackwood smiled, a real smile for the first time in months. "Next, we prepare. We build better ships, stronger defenses. We reach out to other species tired of empires, like the Dominion. We show the galaxy that Earth stands for something worth protecting. Freedom," Al-Rashid said. "More than that," Blackwood corrected. "Hope. Every world conquered by an empire will hear our story. They will learn that resistance is possible. We become a symbol. As sunset turned the garden golden, more people arrived. There were tears, but also laughter. Stories shared to keep memories alive not as tragedy, but as triumph. Sophie Chun stood to leave. "Before you go," Director Voss said, "we're forming a new division. A rapid response fleet. I want you to be part of it. Your brother's data, your courage. You've proven yourself." Sophie looked at the tree, at her brother's name. "What would David want me to do?" she asked. Voss smiled gently. "He would want you to keep fighting, to make sure no other sister has to visit a memorial tree, to protect the future he died for." "Then I accept," Sophie said, her voice steady. "For David, for all of them." As night fell, the people of Earth looked to the stars not with fear, but with defiance. We had been tested by a force that had conquered thousands of worlds, and we had passed that test. The galaxy had tried to make us kneel, and humanity answered with thunder. The Dominion would remember Earth, and so would every other species watching from distant stars. They would remember the world that refused to surrender, the people who turned miners into warriors and scientists into heroes. In the years to come, when other oppressed worlds looked to the stars for salvation, they would whisper a name like a prayer. Earth, the planet where ordinary people became legends. The world that taught the universe a simple, powerful truth. Some things are worth fighting for. Some things are worth dying for. And when you threaten those things, when you try to break the human spirit with fear and overwhelming force, you don't get compliance. You get war. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more tailies from across the galaxy. See you next time.